Well, hello, future CRNA. Welcome back to another episode of CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Fennell, CRNA, and founder of CRNA School Prep Academy. So I wanted to share a very special episode with you guys. We're going to give you a taste of our group mock interview coaching that we do for our students inside of CRNA School Prep Academy. I really hope to see you in there for the next coaching session. If you have missed this month's, we will do the next one come May. So again, I really hope to see you take advantage of this. These coaching sessions are done by expert contributor to CSPA, Richard Wilson, who has been an assistant program director for over 11 years. So again, he has sat through hundreds and hundreds of interviews himself and given interviews to future and now current CRNA students. So these sessions are extremely valuable. And while this session is almost 2 hours long, we are going to give you about a half hour, 40-minute taste of what kind of value you can get out of these sessions. I really hope you guys enjoy. And then just so you don't forget, in the show notes below, we have linked to over 100 real CRNA interview questions that you can go ahead and download today. You can also exclusively book your one-on-one mock interview session with the link below. This is a team of CRNAs and SRNAs that we have hand-selected to provide mock interviews to our community. So again, you can go ahead and get these things today. If you want to just pause this episode, make sure you grab your goodies, and we'll get into today's show. And thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy. I'm Jenny Fennell, CRNA and founder of CRNA School Prep Academy. I have always had a passion for helping those who aspire to become a CRNA. A couple of years ago, I started mentoring a handful of prospective students. Fast forward to today, and I have a successful mentoring program that has impacted hundreds of aspiring and now current nurse anesthesia students. What I enjoy the most in my business is connecting with you, the future CRNA. I love learning and growing with you. The road to CRNA is full of unique challenges, and no two journeys are the same. But every journey has a learning opportunity. I'm here to share what I have learned over the years from not just my students, but CRNA community leaders, program faculty, and from my time as a practicing CRNA. This will be your one-stop shop to get the mentoring you need to not only guide you into this career path, but support you all the way through to graduation day. So if you're a nursing student who's exploring the possibility, an ICU nurse actively pursuing CRNA, or a current nurse anesthesia student, you're in the right place. Tune in for inspiration and actionable takeaways that will help you from start to finish. Let's get started.
All right. I have now maneuvered through everything I want to maneuver through and take a look at. So good to see everybody. Glad to have everybody here today as we are looking at CRNA School Prep Academy's first group mock interview session that we're going to do. Jenny and I did one of these sessions and hosted it when we did the conference back in October, and it was a big success, a big hit. One of the things that kept coming up in some of our evals from that conference were, keep doing it. We want to see more of that. And so it was exciting. It was very nice to see, and I'm glad to see that there was that much feedback from it. A lot of people are joining in here, which is great. What we're going to do, and this is kind of the session, I'll give a little bit of background of who I am for those of you that are not familiar with me, a little bit of my credentials so that you kind of understand a little bit of where I'm coming from as I give feedback. I've got a list of questions. You'll see me writing some notes down too. And what I'll do is I'll choose some people and just ask you, hey, answer this question for me. So I'll ask you pretty much in some of the same tone, some of the same manner that you will be asked in an interview. So hopefully you might sweat a little bit, get some hives, who knows. But then what I want to do at the end is I want to give you some feedback. I'll go through some of the things that you did well with it. And then I'll go through some of the things that could maybe use a little bit of work on it so that you'll have that comfortability when you leave out of here that things are good. And so, again, I'll ask the question. I'll give you feedback on your tone, knowledge base, kind of your demeanor as you answer it, all of those little things that I think make a difference through the interviews. So for you, those of you that do not know me, my name is Richard Wilson, and I am a nurse anesthetist. I've been practicing anesthesia for 15 years at a level 1 trauma center. And also, I'm a program faculty member. In 2009, I was hired to open a satellite campus. And so I've been an assistant program director since 2010, where I opened a satellite campus for our program. And I have been working there in the academic didactic area, of course, the clinical setting, and also simulation for all 11 years that I've been as a program faculty member. I have sat on interview committees. I have chaired interview committees. I have probably interviewed close to, if I figure it out, we just went through another round of interviews, 900 individuals I've interviewed, and probably have guided and counseled hundreds more on getting into anesthesia school. So that gives you a little bit of a background of who I am. And so, again, we want to get into some of these conversations and questions. We're going to touch on emotional intelligence and clinical questions. Now, just kind of give an idea of clinical questions. Of course, when we look at clinical questions, that really has to do a lot with your background in the intensive care unit or the emergency room, PACU, general floor, anything that you have on your resume, anything that you have as a clinical experience in your application. And when they talk about clinical questions, kind of give you an idea as you're thinking about a lot of these that they come from. It's going to be, of course, the things that you really think about, the pharmacology. So any of the medications you're using and looking at the receptors, the mechanism of action, the side effects, the indications for using it. When would you not use it? And what do you do when it doesn't work anymore? They're going to look at the monitoring devices. Now, that may depend on which unit you're on, of course, because if you're in a CVICU, you're not going to have an intracranial bolt or an EVD. But if you're in, of course, a neurotrauma unit, you're not going to have an Impella, for example, or worry about an intra-aortic balloon pump. They're going to look at the monitoring devices, and then they're going to look at ventilation modalities. Do you understand what's going on with the vents? I know a lot of you don't get to touch on vents, and we're going to touch a little bit on that moving forward. You don't get to touch the vents at all, per se, but you still need to know about them, and we'll talk about why. Clinical experience also is going to come into, I said the monitoring, the medications, and the protocols that you use within the units. That's a lot to do with the clinical side of it. Now, emotional intelligence has to do with basically how do you see yourself? How do you view the world around you? What kind of contact do you have with that? And can you really look into yourself and see what's going on with you and determine what kind of reaction that you're going to have or control your reactions based on what the environment is about? And so some of that seems like clinical questions when it's asked, because when they say, hey, have you had a confrontation with a physician or a coworker? Have you made a medication error? That really honestly has nothing to do with clinical practice. It's testing pretty much what is testing is going to be emotional intelligence. All right. So that's a little bit of a background. Now, when you prep for interviews, guys, you got to prep for interviews way ahead of time. If you're waiting till the last minute, you're behind the eight ball. And this is why I say that. And we're going to get into some questions here in just a little bit. But I'd like to do a little bit of teaching also with this. And I hope that's okay with you. What we really want to look at when you're talking about prepping for interviews, it's got to start before your application even starts. I always say preparation starts the first day you walk in the unit, or even before that, sometimes when you're in nursing school, but it's got to start before the application starts. And this is why. You look at most programs when they go to interview somebody, they may give them 6 weeks and say, hey, we're going to interview you in 6 weeks. All right. I'll tell you, for example, something we did recently is we had some drop out of the interview process. They got accepted to another school and didn't want to take a risk or a chance. And so they went ahead and declined our interview and accepted a position somewhere else. And so we called some other people and I said, hey, can you join us in 10 days to interview? And of course, we never got turned down because who's going to turn down an interview, right? But they had 10 days to prep. So that's a very short period of time. And so you need to start prepping way ahead of time and practicing these questions over and over and over again. Now, one thing I do encourage you is, I tell you what, I'm going to ask a question here. Mr. I'm going to ask you a question here. You are used to, and this is not this is not a mock interview question. I just having a little conversation with you since you jumped on and I caught your mic being on here. But y'all are familiar, right? You know people are going to ask you what your weaknesses are.
Yes.
Correct? So how do you think they're going to ask that question?
I think they're going to say, do you have weaknesses?
Right. That's what most people think. However, there's probably 4 other ways to ask that question. So most people focus on going and practicing the question of when they ask me, what are my weaknesses? Then I can go, oh, I can answer that. I've practiced that one 100 times already, and I know what it is. However, they may say, I tell you what would your coworkers say is your weakness? Now, it may be the same exact thing, but just because they rephrase it and said your coworkers or your manager or your professor in nursing school, now you start going, oh, crap. Somebody else, I got to now think about what somebody else thought about me, and I have to answer that. Now, you have to understand the program faculty interviewing you has no clue what your manager really would say your weakness is. And we understand that. All right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be that your answer is different. You're just approaching it in a different way. What I find kicks a lot of people in the butt when we do interviews is that alternative way that the question is asked, because they've practiced questions so much and they have looked at them so hard that they really think, okay, it's going to be asked this one way. And then when they ask it a second or a third way or a different way, people think, I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I'm not sure what to do there because, again, it was asked in a different way than what they anticipated. All right. So let's get into some questions here. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Once we ask, I'm going to give you some feedback on how you answered it. I'll give you feedback on, like I said, tone, knowledge, flow through it, time. How long did it take you? Understanding, as I talk about timing with these things also, you only have a couple of minutes. Some of these interviews are only 20 or 30 minutes long. They want to get multiple questions out of you. And so they don't have 10 minutes to listen to you explain why you want to go to anesthesia school. What we're going to talk about is sometimes how can you take those, narrow it down, give the highlights, but leave them just enough, right, where they're interested in it so that they will say, okay, well, I want to know, you said this. Why don't you expound on that a little bit more? So now you're kind of teasing them a little bit, right? You're taking them down the line. Now, I want you to understand, I am a program faculty member. I have a good tendency, or I like to think I have a good ability to separate my role as a program faculty member and my role in CRNA School Prep Academy. They are completely 2 separate roles that I work in 2 separate entities, 2 separate venues with that. All right. So this is why some of the stuff I say, you're going to say, really, is a program faculty member saying that? Because I'm speaking to you as a mentor and a guide through CRNA School Prep Academy. All right. So you have to understand when you go into an interview as a program faculty member, what am I going to want to do? I want to know as much about you as I can. And I'm going to want to control the interview because I'm the one who wants to know the information about you. And so I want to control the interview. However, there are techniques and tactics as an individual that you can take if you're interviewing to help guide the interview maybe towards where you want it to go and get the information out that you want without kind of saying, well, this is what I want to say, or without looking like you're not answering the question because you just want to say what you want to say. So you have to be careful about that. And I'll talk about some of those tactics. All right. So, Mr. We'll go with you. Since I've already asked you one question, let's go ahead and keep moving forward with you with our first question. And tell me real quickly, where do you work?
I currently work in the MICU CQ unit in Houston, Texas, as a travel nurse.
As a travel nurse, awesome. All right, and you'll see me looking down because I'm writing some notes. All right, so MICU CQ as a travel nurse in Houston, Texas. All right, that's great. All right, so what drew you towards Houston, Texas as an assignment?
Well, I've been in the Houston, Texas area since 2017. My wife and I, we made that decision to move over to this area, and that was a decision that I made to start travel nursing since I was looking towards anesthesia school.
All right. So tell me real quickly about the typical type of patient as a traveler that you're getting in that MICU CQ.
Lately, the typical kind of patients we've been getting, it's COVID patients, but we do get hypotensive patients, patients that are in shock. We have the unit that I work in, it's not a CVICU, but we do recover open heart patients as well.
Okay. So, but you told me that COVID was kind of your primary is what it sounded like when we were talking there. So yeah. I've heard, and just out of curiosity, because I've heard a lot about this whole proning thing. And, we didn't do that when I was back in the early 2000s. We had these rotoprone beds, but, a lot of my colleagues now have been going up there and proning people on the floors. What is this for? I mean, why are we doing this proning?
Well, the whole premise behind proning is to improve oxygenation on the patients. And proning, usually it's, the patient usually would lay supine. So we'll take this patient that is laying supine on their back and flip them on their stomach. And the whole goal is to help recruit alveoli and help ventilate, help them with the ventilation and perfusion process.
Oh, you said ventilation and perfusion. I've heard those terms before. Is there like mismatch? That's where I heard of ventilation, perfusion, mismatches.
Mismatch.
So when we look at ventilation, perfusion, mismatches, somebody was trying to explain this to me the other day. Shunt and dead space. Are you familiar with those terms?
Shunt and dead space? I don't want to guess, but dead space usually it's the areas where there's not enough ventilation coming into. All
right, so I walked you down a bunch of questions right there, right?
Right.
And you did well. So, and I'm kind of walk everybody through some of the questions I asked. And the reason I asked them as a faculty member, what I was looking for in some of those questions and how he did. So one thing is, this is a virtual interview. This is a process that sometimes you may have to have as you're going through anesthesia school. Now, you may not always be face-to-face. So what I'm going to try to give you is some advice if you were sitting face-to-face with an interviewer or whether you're doing it virtual. Now, virtual, you did a great job. You stayed connected with me. I felt like you were talking to me the whole time. I did not feel like you were looking off. And every once in a while, you'll see people kind of roll their eyes off a little bit or kind of look away a little bit. And we know that that's all thought processes, right? As we're trying to think, our minds and our eyes go up. There's actually, I think it was something that said, or somebody was telling me they'd read an article. If you look up and right, you're thinking. If you look down and left, you're cheating. And I really want to do a bunch of interviews. This is just me, guys. And this is my soapbox kind of tangent. I just want to do a bunch of interviews and then test people and see if that's true. I think that'd be fun. I think that'd be hilarious. So anyways, but you did a good job with, if you did, you kind of came right back on point with me and looked at me, because it's hard, especially during a virtual interview or even in person when you're thinking about it, to look and stay connected. In virtual, you're only looking at the camera. And so it's kind of a little bit easier because then everybody feels connected to you because everybody feels like you're looking at them. When you're in a personal interview, don't forget to look around a little bit, because you don't want to get so focused on somebody that you're not picking up on some of the other reactions going on and being cognizant of everybody else is going on. So I usually tell people, scan the room. When you're answering, obviously the first person you answer to is the person that asked the question. And then once you kind of get going with them, and then you can scan to the other people a little bit as you're answering it. And that way, if they get a confused look on their face and you go, oh, I'm sorry, was something I say, didn't make sense, or can I explain something a little bit more for you? And then they are feeling like, oh my goodness, Mr. is, not only was he answering their question, but he stayed engaged with me. So he's got very good awareness of his surroundings. All right. So a couple of things I asked you was, why did you do Houston, Texas as your first travel assignment? And that's going to get multiple factors in. One, are you honest with me? Because we could tell. We know a lot of stuff about travel assignments now is money. It's COVID burnout, it's unit burnout, and it's money. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. All right. And so we're trying to see the thought processes of what people are doing. We used to do this a good bit too before COVID. And people would say, well, I've never traveled to San Diego and I've heard it's beautiful. So that's where I went for my first assignment. Or I like skiing, so I always make sure I'm at this place in the winter when I travel. And that's fine. It just kind of gives us an idea of personality too, and what we may see the same on. All right. So that's kind of an interesting way of reason we ask that. It also gives us an idea about support systems. He just told me that he has support system in Houston, Texas. He's got a wife. He's got a family that if he's in the Houston area can support him. But then it may come up later and be prepared for later on this interview that if we were going to continue it to say, all right, you mentioned your wife, she's back home in Houston, support systems are big. Are you going to be able to bring her here with you? Is she's going to come to South Carolina or Georgia or New York or, wherever you go to school? They would say, is she going to come with you? Or are you going to be coming by yourself? Because that's additional stress and strain that they're going to take into consideration. So you don't want to lie to them about it, but it opens the door for them to say, and it also gives you a chance that now that we ask that to say, yeah, she'll be coming with me, or no, she won't. And here's what our plans are. And it shows them that you've thought about this. This is not a fly by night. I just put my application in 2 days before the deadline, that you've really thought about what you want to do, because they want to see that you've planned this out. That if they're going to take a risk on you, and understand, guys, you may have a 3.9 GPA, you may have a 320 GRE, and you may have 3 years of experience in a good ICU. But every time we accept somebody into anesthesia school, we're taking a risk on them. Because just because you are a great nurse or a great educated person doesn't mean you're going to be successful in nurse anesthesia school. Jenny and I actually are going to record a podcast on that. I'm excited about that one to talk about. It takes more than just a good nurse to make it through anesthesia school. So we talked about that. Then I asked you about proning because you told me that COVID patients was the main thing that you were taking care of in the ICU. Now, that was very good. You opened up well. However, if you noticed, I paused. I didn't say much. I just kind of let you start to go from there. And you're going to see faculty members do that, because then you started to say, well, it's COVID, and then it's this, and then it's this, and we don't see much of this, but we have this. Now, be careful with that. You're going to see program faculty members and interviewers pause. Silence is okay. Silence seems awkward. How many of y'all love silence, right? When you're talking to somebody and silence comes about, everybody's like, oh, crap. Did I say something wrong? Did I not say enough? Did I say too much? Were they even really paying attention to me? So silence is interesting. And what we see is when people get nervous, silence by others causes them to talk more because they think, oh, well, I didn't give them everything they wanted. So in this, you told me a little bit of, you didn't really do cardiac patients, but you did take some open hearts. Now, here's the risk. I may say, oh, well, we were going to talk about COVID and you're comfortable talking about COVID. But I may say, well, you mentioned open hearts. Let's see what you actually do know about those, because if you're going to take care of them, you need to know something about them. And it's not a patient population that you're very comfortable with, but now you're going to have to ask questions about it. So be careful about how you ask the question. And also, what was the question I asked? What's the most common patient you take care of? There's only one most, right? There's only one most, one best, one least, one worst. So you don't have to expand. You just say, it's the COVID patient, or it's the open heart, post-open heart, or it's the neurotrauma patient. They didn't ask about the entire unit. They only asked about the most. All right. Now, sometimes they will say, in your units, what are the typical patient loads you take care of? And then that's fine to expand at that time that it's a variety. But usually if they say most, anticipate that what they're about to do is lead you down a clinical question route on that type of a patient that they just asked you about. All right. Shunt versus dead space. I asked you a little bit about shunning and dead spacing. And that's, you don't have to know everything about that. And that's okay. You did well with it because you said, I'm not sure about the exact answer on it. But if I'm not mistaken, when you have dead space, you have this. That's okay. I like that. I like seeing people walk that line, is what I call it, or start to share knowledge. And here's why. When you think about sharing knowledge base, and the first person, good job for answering this, because the first person to always answer these questions is the hardest, right? Because now everybody's getting feedback that they can use for the next questions. But what we look at here is when you talk about walking the line, answering a question, giving some knowledge base. Say I asked you about 4 or 5 questions and all you said was, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll ask somebody. I'll find that out. Now, you probably had some knowledge base because all of you guys are very, very brilliant people. All right. You wouldn't be where you're at today. You wouldn't be trying to go to anesthesia school if you were not smart people, plain and simple. Right. It's just whether or not you have that confidence. We were actually looking at a bunch of application files the other day and interviewing people. And I have 15 years of nurse anesthesia experience, 10 years or more as a program faculty. I have sat on national committees for writing exam questions. I'm mentoring, and I'm still not sure I could get into anesthesia school these days with the statistics I had. So y'all are all very brilliant people. All right. Now, the problem is a lot of you think that the program wants the exact right answer. Sometimes they don't care about a right answer. They just want to see how much knowledge base you do have. So in other words, I'm not sure about shunning and dead space, but I know I've heard those terms. And when I've heard those terms, what they had to do was basically with ventilation and perfusion of the lungs. One has to do with not being able to ventilate, but you've got good perfusion. One has to do with no perfusion no perfusion, but plenty of ventilation. I can't remember which one is which, but I do know they're centered around those. Now, you see how right there, I still didn't give them a perfect answer, right? I didn't give them I know what the shunt is and I know what the dead space is. But what they were able to figure out was I knew about pathophysiology within the lung and that I knew ventilation and perfusion and how they correlate together and how I may be able to infer some things from there. So you don't have to always have, because if you always come up and think I've got to have the right answer and you answer, I don't know, I'll get back to you, I'm not sure, then what we end up with is a bunch of I don't knows and nobody else has a clue what you know. So good job. All right, we're going to move to another question. I tell you what, Mr. If you don't mind disconnecting your video so somebody can connect back in. And great job.
Thank you.
All right. All right, let's go with, hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Where are you from, Sarah?
I'm living in Pennsylvania, and I've been here for about 18 years, and I'm from New England originally.
Nice. So thank you for coming to our interview today. We're so excited that you joined us. So there's been, looking at your resume here, there's a lot of great things that I see on your resume. So what would you tell me, though, in your mindset or in your thought process, what is the greatest accomplishment out of all of these things I see here? What is your greatest accomplishment?
My greatest accomplishment, I feel, is that when I've wrapped up precepting a person and they've kind of jumped into the deep end and they go on to really start to get the whole ICU process, and I just continue mentoring them every time I see somebody go from they're scared and nervous when they first start to gaining that confidence and moving off into being an independent nurse. It's really amazing feeling.
Wonderful. So how long have you been precepting?
About 2 years.
And how many have you precepted over those 2 years approximately?
So because I had my daughter last year, so it's been a little, my precepting schedule has been a little jumpy, but I've primarily precepted 3 people, and then we tend to have a variety of other preceptees hop in and out. But we're a pretty close-knit unit, so we all kind of feel like a big family when we precept.
All right. And how big is your unit?
We have they've adjusted the size, but right now we have 16 beds.
And what type of unit are you in?
I'm in medical surgical ICU.
All right. Great. All right. Thank you. So great answers. All right. Great job. What did here, and this was, of course, an emotional intelligence question. And what was doing here is we were looking at what drives her, right? What is that thing that makes her feel good? What drives her and what keeps her going each and every time that she's in that unit? And what we found out was, and we can interpret this as, one, a love for people. She enjoys people. So she's probably going to be a good team player. All right. She's going to work well with others, and she's going to work well with classmates because she's going to be coming into a program that potentially has, 30, 40, 50 people, and they're going to be from all over the nation. And so she's going to have to adjust to them. So we see that she did a good job portraying that she wanted to mentor people, and that seeing that accomplishment and seeing them become proficient at what they do and be able to go on and practice on their own. However, she still liked that feeling that they came back to her over and over for additional advice within the unit. All right. So we see that. Now, one thing again, she opened the door about a personal life. When I asked her about how many she precepted, one thing I would say is you led with, I just had my daughter last year. You said last year, right? Yeah. Congratulations, by the way. But you said, I just had my daughter last year. And so I've only precepted around 3. Now, what you just did in that whole scenario was you switched the conversation in a way you didn't really want to, because you had a very positive feeling going. Nothing wrong with having the daughter. Again, congratulations. I've got a 15-year-old at home, daughter. God bless you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, though, about sort of taking a side.
Yeah. So now what you did was, and it's great to mention your daughter, but you've now opened the conversation to a personal one where somebody may say, oh, well, you got a daughter. Now, if you're going to come to school in Illinois, you got support system, you got people going to help, because it's a hard program.
It is.
Right? And so just be prepared for those questions. There's going to be no way, if you've got a family, I'm going to be honest with you, there is no way you're going to keep conversation about a family out of this.
Yeah.
They're going to figure it out at some point. However, what I think you're probably better off in doing in this scenario is when you say, well, I just had a daughter last year, and so I've only precepted 3. You've now switched it where it almost sounded like you were using your daughter as an excuse of not having more. But if you would start off with, well, I've precepted 3, and that went real well. I really enjoyed it. Had to take a little break because I had my daughter last year. And after the break, I'm planning on getting right back into it. But I do have some others, that are not my preceptees, but they do come to us for advice. Now you see how the whole different perspective is there.
It's so tough with the phrasing sometimes when you're on the spot.
Uh-huh. And that's why we're practicing here. And that's why I want to give you advice here on just thinking about the phrasing, because you've got the same concept, right? It's just the phrasing has a difference in the mentality, and it's the order of the phrasing sometimes that plays the entire role in that. Yeah. So I think you did well on it overall, but you want to be careful about in what order you phrase them and how you do. All right?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. Miss.
Hello.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. Have we met?
We have. Okay. I was at the conference.
I thought we had met. Well, it's good to see you again. So tell me a little bit about what unit you work on.
I work in a CVICU.
Awesome. CVICU. I'm sure that's a very challenging unit. Mm-hmm. So what kind of patients do you get?
We do a lot of heart failure patients and post-surgical patients.
Okay. Now, heart failure and post-surgical. Which patient population would you like to talk the most about?
I'm pretty comfortable with both, so let's go with heart failure.
All right. So in your heart failure patients, do y'all talk about eccentric versus concentric ventricular hypertrophy?
So not to that extent. I haven't heard much about that, to be honest with you. But I know about hypertrophy of the heart. I don't know about the specific types of hypertrophy, but I do know about hypertrophy of the heart.
Okay. So what are some of the key things I need to worry about with heart failure patients?
Heart failure patients, you want to make sure that they're not getting too volume overloaded because the heart cannot pump adequately. So you don't want the lungs to start getting backed up and them going to respiratory failure. You also want to make sure that they're having adequate perfusion.
So would this have anything to do with the Frank-Starling law?
It does. The Frank-Starling law has to deal with the volume in a patient and how volume resuscitated you can get a patient. You can get up to a certain point of volume before you are overworking the heart too much, from what I understand.
What do you mean by overworking the heart?
So there's a certain, from what I understand, a certain point in the Frank-Starling law where you have optimization of heart function as far as the amount of volume. If you go too much volume, you're overworking the heart because it's trying to pump too much volume. But if you don't have enough, then you won't have enough to perfuse the body.
All right. So you talk about perfusion. I mean, can we still, I guess, what factors play into perfusion?
So you're looking at how adequately your organs are getting blood, and that could deal with preload, we could do with afterload, or with the amount of squeeze that your heart is getting, or contractility.
Okay. So I'm assuming y'all probably in these heart failure patients do a lot of arterial lines.
We do.
So what kind of data can I get from an arterial line?
From an art line, not only are you getting the blood pressure parameters, you're also getting maps, which are going to be able to give you how well the organs are perfusing. But you're also able to tell, basically just like your map, your blood pressure, how well the contractility is according to the waveform. You'll be able to tell if you're getting a good systolic versus diastolic pulse pressure.
Have you heard of the term DP over DT?
Not that I'm very familiar with, no.
Okay. All right. Not many people. That's an older term. I'm dating myself by putting that one, but it's change of pressure over change of time, DP over DT. And so basically it has to do with the anachronic limb of the arterial line. Do you know which side the anachronic limb is?
Not very familiar. I know you're referring to the upslope before the dicrotic notch, because I'm not exactly.
Yeah, it would be the upstroke. It'd be the upstroke. Okay. So what does the upstroke on that arterial line tell me?
If I'm not mistaken, the upstroke of the arterial line is telling you that the heart is going into systole. It's the beginning of systole, when your ventricles are contracting and you have the major force of the blood running through the blood vessels.
So could it tell me then by the slope of that, or the DPDT that I was just talking about, could that tell me whether my heart has a contractility issue or not?
I'm not quite sure, but I would assume that it could at least.
Okay. All right. So a couple of phrases you use there. So we kind of ran through several different scenarios. You see how I kind of walked you from one topic to the next, to the next, to the next?
Yes.
But how they all correlated with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of walked you from one to one, kind of moving along those lines. Now, what I want to look at here is a couple of things you said. From what I understand. You kind of said that about 3 or 4 different times.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you want to be careful about using phrases like that over and over again.
Okay.
Using them once is okay. Using them twice when they're at different parts, when they're at different parts is okay. Like, in other words, in the beginning, and maybe if you say it a little bit towards the end, but you kind of said it several different times in a row right there. Mm-hmm. And so you want to kind of stay away from that. And the reason is because you want to show some confidence. You don't mind saying, hey, I don't understand this, but you want to have confidence. So if you're staying on the same topic, you want to give them some information, right? Another phrase you used was, if I am not mistaken. Again, that goes along with that same thing. However, at the very end, you had not used it for a while. So then you said, I'm not sure. But the way you followed, you said, I'm not sure, but you followed it with a very confident answer that flowed very well from there. So that was good. All right. Now, make sure that you think about topics that they're going to talk about. So, of course, with Frank Starling, you did well. There's still some other topics there associated with it. When you look at Frank Starling, it has to do with stretch of the heart. It has to do with the more you stretch the heart. So it's really not volume. It's more about stretch. Okay. But everybody says volume, because actually when I went through it at ICU, CVP was all about volume. It wasn't until I got to anesthesia school that I realized CVP was pressure. It really had nothing to do with volume in the heart. It really just has to do with pressure on the right atrium. So you could actually have you could be fluid volume depleted and have a high CVP if you got high intrathoracic pressure, because it's really just measuring. So anyways, I could get started on that for days. I love education, but we want to make sure that you know as much as you can. Think about topics that are key to you. So think about those like Frank Starling and learn it in detail, right? You did a good job understanding arterial lines, understanding the details, understand probably if you're talking about post-surgical cases, you're going to look at those and understand swans if y'all are using those on a consistent basis, and intraoral balloon pumps. So make sure you know what topics the big topics you're pretty sure they're going to ask on, and get those pretty much down pat. All right.
Okay.
The other thing is, you did not answer my question when I first asked it. I said, what kind of patients do you take care of? And the first thing you said was
heart failure.
In the unit. No, yeah. You said in the units, here's what we do. Okay. I didn't ask the unit. Answer their question.
I didn't even realize I said that. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And that's okay. Again, this is just fun. All right. At least it's fun for me. But no, you did great answering the question. I thought you did a very good job. But answer what they ask you, because again, you may say heart failure and post-surgical, but you may not do a lot of post-surgical patients. Mm-hmm. You may do mostly heart failure. And then they're going to say, well, let's talk about post-surgical. And then why don't you do post-surgical? Are you not qualified to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you are. We know that. But you don't want to give them any ability to question that kind of stuff. All right? Good contact with me. You flowed well. Your voice, both of y'all with your voices, they stayed at a good level. I saw inflection up and down. Wasn't just straight monotone. But both of you did very well. So good job.
Thanks.
Hey friend, I hope you found that as helpful as I did, and I'm rooting for you. Whether it's your first, second, or third CRNA school interview, I want you to get the yes that you so desperately dream of. So I hope to see you inside the Academy for our next session. Again, that's taking place in May. And I also hope in the meantime that you go ahead and download your CRNA School interview questions, and also remember to book your 101 mock interview session. It is not too early to start practicing today. If you gained anything out of this whole episode, I hope you realize that you could be asked to interview with very little notice. And so you should really be preparing for your CRNA School interview today. So you guys take care, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Hey, future CRNA. As always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to include the hashtag CRNA School Prep Academy. If you're on Facebook, be sure to join ICU Dreaming About Anesthesia by CRNA School Prep Academy. This is a private community that you will find free guidance and support along your journey into CRNA school. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.